What happens to drug addicts in prison? This is what I'm going to be talking about in this episode. And hi everybody, welcome to my channel. Ricky here from Behind the Bars TV. And I'm going to be talking about drug addicts on their first day into prison and what happens to them. But I'll also go on to talk about what happens to them further on in the sentence. But I got asked to do this one from one of my subscribers who actually looks after drug addicts out here in the community, tries to help rehabilitate them and gives them advice and guidance. And she's been watching my channel for a while and she finds inspiration from it and she shows it to the clients that she's helping. So this video is about what happens to drug addicts in prison. So on the way to prison, if someone who is addicted to drugs, they'll be worrying, thinking, what is going to happen when I get to prison, especially if it's the first time, because they'll not have a clue about what lies ahead. Obviously, the seasoned criminals that are in and out all the time will know exactly what to expect. But someone going in for first time who's addicted to drugs, this is what happens. So you get processed through reception, you go up into the reception area and you speak to the officers on the desk and they'll go through your paperwork, get you to sign a few things, take all your possessions from you, take all your clothes from you, search you, strip search you, put you into a holding cell in the reception area with the rest of the lads or lasses who are waiting to be processed and put onto the reception wing. But then once you've done all that, you get took into a side room to see a nurse. And when you see the nurse, she does a check on you. She asks if you've got any health problems, any drug addictions. And a lot of the time, some of the lads who have been to prison a lot of the times will actually try and blag the nurses. And what I mean by that is they'll blag them to say that on the outside, the doctor prescribes them a certain medication. And the reason why they do this, because they're hoping that the nurses or the healthcare in prison will just turn around and say they try and turn around and say, oh, I'm on benzodiazepines, which is Valium. If they say that to the nurse in prison, they'll think to themselves, oh, they're going to give us Valium. But that doesn't happen because they go on and check your medical records, and if they see you're not on it, you'll not get it. But when you're getting processed off the nurse and she asks, have you got a drug addiction? And what I'll do, I'll use, for an example, a heroin user. So if a heroin user who needs a fix every day, who's been addicted to it for maybe a long time, 5, 10 years, he's going to be stressed out of his head, or her, depending on whether they're in a male or female prison. They're going to be stressed out of their heads thinking, I can't get a fix, I'm going to be rattling, I'm going to have the worst time of my life. So they tell the nurse how long they've been on it, how much they've been taking, and sometimes, like I've mentioned, when people try and blag it, just to get either methadone or something else, just to try and get through the sentence. Everybody that goes into prison, in the reception area, the nurse will ask you to go and do a piss test, a urine test, and it'll come back, and if it comes back, for this individual that I'm using an example, as a heroin user, so it comes back as opiates in his piss, then you'll be prescribed what's called methadone, and he's probably on methadone in the community. But in prison slang, they call it jungle juice, because if anyone who's never seen methadone before, it's a thick green liquid what heroin addicts need to take if they can't get any heroin to stop them from rattling. Because I've seen lads in prison withdrawn from heroin, and it's not a very nice sight to see. You can hear them in the pads next door screaming out at night because they're in that much pain and agony because they're withdrawn from the heroin. That's if they haven't gotten the methadone. So in the morning, these are the ones that get unlocked first, or most of the prisons I've been in, they do, because the nurse comes on 7, 8 o'clock in the morning and she gets set up, because at the end of every wing, they've got like a little, tiny little nurse's room, but it's through bars like this, where the nurse is behind here and she passes the medication out through the bars, and obviously that's so none of the inmates can get through to rob the medication cabinet. So they get given methadone, which helps them with the withdrawal symptoms. But again, someone that's been using heroin for that amount of time, methadone just isn't gonna, it's just not gonna, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not gonna be a good enough substitute for it. So they'll be looking for it on the wing. And most of the jails that you go in, you don't really find a lot. They did, maybe years ago when I was in Franklin prison, the main drug that was in there was heroin. But since then, obviously since the spices took over, it's mainly spice and subbies. But Subutex, which is also called buprenorphine, is also a heroin substitute. And you get them in different milligrams. But I remember in prison when I was talking to lads, you get the 8 milligram subbies, and some of the lads will crush these up and sniff them, and it's similar effects to heroin. But again, if you've got no money, you're coming in off the streets, you can't afford to get drugs off anybody, you're just getting your methadone, you're going to be going through a hell of a time in prison. Some lads, if they're strong enough, prison is actually ideal for them if they're heroin addicts. And not just heroin addicts, alcoholics, any type of drug that they're addicted to, it's going to help them, if they're strong enough, get off the habit and get out of prison better people. But again, I'll go back to reception and say someone's an alcoholic who's coming off the streets. Remember this homeless lad, he'd been living on the streets for about 10 years and used to drink cider every single day. So imagine being a cider drinker that's drinking cider every single day for 10 years. You end up in prison and there's no drink there. There's hooch if you look around for it, but someone who's homeless coming in off the streets is not going to have the funds to buy whatever they can in prison, and so they'll not get it. But again, when they're telling the nurse that they are alcoholics, the nurses will do checks on them, or they'll be able to tell, and they give them tablets. I can't remember exactly what the tablets were, but I'm sure they only give them for around about 5 days, because I was padded up with a lad, and this homeless lad that I'm talking about told it as well. So for 5 days they were giving them these tablets, and I'm sure it was morning and night, and this was helping with their withdrawal symptoms of the alcohol, and it was helping them sleep at night. But again, if they have been on alcohol for 10 years, these tablets aren't going to be sufficient enough. So they're going to have, drug addicts have a harder time in prison when they can't get any drugs as well. If they're going to prison and they've got drug habits and they've got money on the outside where they can fund the habit, then again, prisons are rife with drugs. So they'll be able to buy it, but it'll be 10 times the amount of what they pay on the outside, because those subbies, an 8 milligram tablet can go for up to £100. It depending on which prison you're in, on whether there's loads of drugs in the prison or not. Because if there's a shortage of drugs in a certain prison, the price of that drug will go up rapidly. But an 8 milligram Subutex gets chopped up into about 8 bits, obviously chopped up into 4 quarters or into 8ths, and even an 1/8 of a subby can be sold for like £10, and that might last the inmate 1 day. But again, the more they're taking it every day in the prison, I've seen lads taking half subbies a day, full subbies. And anyone who knows what I'm talking about, if they're taking that amount, it's a massive amount of a subbie. I've seen lads in prison taking it for the first time. They'll have a little bit of a Subutex, and within half an hour, they're spewing the ring up. And I've heard that's what happens with heroin as well. When people take heroin for the first time, they're spewing the ring up off it. I've had people on my podcast before who spoke about it, who used to take heroin when they were younger, and that was the same sort of effects. So if you're a drug addict going into prison, you're going to have a very rough time. But also, I have seen people going in who's never took drugs before, and they've actually left prison with a drug habit. And that's actually happened even more and more now. Some people are going into prison who's never touched drugs in their life, or they might have dabbled in what you would call social drugs, or what people call social. They might have been to raves or whatever, took ecstasies, maybe it's a bit of coke, but they'll go into prison and they'll get a habit on the spice or a habit on the subbies. And that spice, like I've said, is totally rife within the prisons, and you can get addicted to that. And I've seen the effects of lads in prison taking that sort of stuff, and it absolutely mashes their heads clean up. They come out where it turns them into living zombies. But again, some of these people that are going in there, they can't handle prison, and they're getting offered drugs left, right and centre, and they're just taking them to get through the sentence. Because prison is, most of the prisons up and down the country are rife with drugs. So if you're in there and you're having a bad day, you're having a bad time, someone will come up and sometimes it's maybe a friend that'll come up and they're thinking they're helping you out, giving you a bit of advice or something, or saying, listen, have a little bit of this, it'll get you through the day. That person might think, oh, stuff it, I'll try it. So then they'll try it, then, oh, wasn't that bad that. The next day they want to try it again, but before they know it, they're taking it every single day. But then there'll become a time when the prison runs dry, where there's no drugs in the prison at all, the security's clamped right down, people are on closed visits, they can't get stuff in, the screws that were bringing stuff in have been sacked or they've been moved, and the wing runs dry. And the dynamics of the prison or the wing, when there's no drugs on it, just totally changes. Because when you see that there's drugs on the wing, everyone's off their heads, they're out running all over the place. And then maybe it's a couple of weeks later, when they've all got habits and the prison runs dry of drugs, they're all walking around like zombies, sick of their lives. They're having the worst time ever. And that's what you've got to think of if you're out here in the community and you're committing crimes to fund your heroin habit or whatever. This is what you've got to think of when you land in there and you can't get your drugs, what you're going to be going through to try and get it. You're going to be withdrawn. And if you're in a pad sharing the same cell with somebody who's a drug addict, or sharing the cell with someone who, well, both of you are drug addicts, and then you can't get it, two people up, banged up 23 hours a day, turkeying, because that's another term for rattling. They're going through a turkey, cold turkey, rattling, both in the pad together. And that's where a lot of suicides come into play, because people can't handle the feelings of despair when they're locked in a pad 23 hours a day. They're not mentally strong up there, and they end up swinging. They end up killing themselves because they can't get through the rattle. And that's what's happening in the prisons up and down the country. The ones that, like I say, they're rife with drugs. But mainly at the minute, like I've mentioned, the drugs are spice and Subutex. And the lads that don't take those sort of drugs, they'll just be brewing up hooch, and they'll be having weekly sessions, once or twice a month maybe. They'll be getting together. Maybe I've seen them. You'll have seen the TikTok videos. I've put some up before. Get about 10 lads in the pad on the hooch, and they're all bouncing around. But that hooch, I'll talk about that now as well, since we're on about drugs in prison. Hooch, Once you've had a cup full of that stuff, it's absolutely lethal if it's brewed properly. One cupful and you can feel it. But imagine you've got all these lads in prison together. The majority are in for violent offences. And when intoxicated, they become even more violent. So they can have that one extra glassful or cupful. And I've seen it. They go out onto the lands. They want to fight everybody. The screws are running behind the gates, locking themselves away. The wings in uproar. And even when the lads get banged up behind the door, they're drinking on in the pads by themselves or with the pad mates. And I've heard pad mates getting smashed to bits off the other pad mate. It happened when I was in home house. I knew everybody was on the, well, everyone was on the hooch just about on the wing. There was about 5 fights during association. Then when everyone got banged up, there was a couple of lads padded up. They were on the landing above me, straight opposite, and got to about 10 o'clock at night, and all you could hear was loads of banging on, kicking on, screaming on, and I was I was in the pub by myself. Me and the lad next door, because he's banging on, saying, "Can you hear that?" So I've turned my telly down, and as you do in prison, everyone's at the door, ears at the gap, in the gap of the door, trying to listen to see what's going on. The screws have had to actually go in and separate them, because they're kicking the shit out of each other full of the hooch. But the next morning, they couldn't even remember doing it. Another one of he was actually my pal whilst I was in home house. He said he was totally embarrassed the next door. He was 3 pads down from me. The screws were trying to get him down the block because he was that pissed. He was smashing his pad up. And he was actually screaming. They were dragging him. And he was squealing on. He actually sounded like a woman. He was squealing that much. But they brought him back to the wing a couple of days later after he'd been down. Obviously, he was down the block, seeing the governor, got a nicking, got whatever happened to him, came back on the wing, had his head down, and he was saying, "Didn't tell us." So anyways, we were all telling him what happened and the way he was behaving, and he was absolutely embarrassed to bits because obviously the way that he was squealing on, and he's not that type of lad, but that's what happens when you drink hooch. It's that strong, and if you've got violent tendencies anywhere, it'll send you over the edge, and you'll even be in the pad by yourself, fighting with yourself, smashing your own pad up. But that's the type of things in prison with drugs and drug addicts. So I just thought I would cover that one in this episode because I got asked to do this one a while back. So for you drug addicts that are trying to get clean in that hostel or in that place of accommodation, and you're thinking about relapsing or having that next drink, think that next drink or that relapse, that heroin or whatever you're taking, if you are an addict, think about what's going to happen if you have that next one. You can't control it. It carries on. You end up in prison. And this is the type of things that's going to happen to you. Because you'll also be exploited in prison if you can't afford to buy your drugs in prison. The lads, for their own entertainment, will give you drugs just to watch your reaction. You'll have seen the videos where they're giving lads spice, but they're giving them a massive amount of it so they know that they're going to go over. And they're doing it for their own entertainment. I've seen the ones up in Northumberland where it was years ago now, where they were calling it dog fights. They were making these 2 lads strip off naked, get on the floor on their hands and knees, and they had like a collar around their necks, and they were holding them back, and they were calling it dog fights. They were giving them spice to fight each other on the floor, pretending that they were dogs. So that's what'll happen if you can't afford drugs in prison and you're dying for it. They'll exploit you to do daft things like that, or they'll pay you to go and do a hit on somebody. Because I've seen people going in there doing a 2-month sentence, and they've been paid £100 worth of spice to go and slash somebody, thinking that they're going to get away with it. But beforehand, they're taking the spice, so they're not knowing what they're doing. They're going down, they're slashing this person. Bearing in mind, these prisons have got cameras on every wings. So this lad that actually done it went down, sliced someone from behind, big scar down his face, and he ended up getting a 12-year EDS, and he had a matter of weeks left on his sentence. He was crying in his pad one night because he was in the pad next door to me, this one. And he was telling us all about it. And he used to cry himself asleep, thinking that he could have been released within a couple of weeks. But because of his addiction, his addiction took over him, and he went and done this hit for somebody, got paid £100 worth of spice and 12-year EDS, and out of the 12, he had to do, because it was an extended sentence, you do 2/3 now anyways, but that time, he had to do 8 years before he was up for release. Then he was out on license for an extended time, and if he messed up on the outside, which, if he wasn't clued up like the way he's not, he could end up serving that full 12 years for something that was all to do with his drug addiction. But I'll leave that one there for now. People have covered quite a bit in this one. If you want us to do any other videos or cover any more stuff that you would find entertaining or what you want us to do, drop it in the comments. But again, go down, double check to make sure that you subscribe to my channel, because a lot of people aren't. But thanks to all my subscribers, thanks to all my Patreon members, and go down, and if you even are subscribed, hit the notification bell so you never miss another video. So that's it, people. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.